I wasn't interested in changing the world of art. I was interested in painting scenes and pictures of things that touched me. And if it touched me, I knew it would touch other people. My brother used to come home from the Air Force Academy and draw Peanuts characters for me, you know, Snoopy and Charlie Brown. And that's when I remember I first started to realize the cartoons I was looking at weren't just manufactured somewhere. They were made by a person. And my brother was copying them, and I wanted to impress him. So I had him show me how to do that. And they're really bad, but as a young kid, I don't know, I was probably in first or second grade or something. And then I realized how much fun that was. I was always trying to impress him. He didn't come home very often, so anytime he was home, I'm showing him stuff. And then after a while, I realized I was trying to impress myself to get better. When I would show a drawing to my mom, she'd critique it. Instead of saying, oh, that's so wonderful, and throwing it on the refrigerator or something, which actually we didn't do back then, but she would say, well, I think the proportion's off on this horse or something like that. And I thought, God, are you supposed to do that? Aren't you supposed to love everything? But then I realized that, wow, if I can get her to look at it and say, wow, that's great, now I've really done something. I applied to almost every art school I could think of and got rejected by all of them, except the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and they put me on probation. So I had to make a C average in order to stay there. I thought, wow, this art thing is really gonna be tricky. I can't believe this. And then I got there and realized there were so many students like me. And I drew better than some, and some drew circles around me. So I could see there was a range of skills, but I couldn't figure out if someone wasn't drawing at the level I was, how come it was so hard to get in? You know? But when I was 19, I walked into the art museum in Cincinnati, because I grew up just south of there. And they had a show of Frank Dubonek's work, oil painter from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And the paint on that canvas was so luscious. The light, the color, the thickness of the stroke. I could feel him laying the paint on it. It was already 100 years old. And it just knocked me out. And I thought, if I could do that, then I could do anything. Later on, after that, I was still looking at paintings that told stories and talked about people. And it just naturally led me to stop at the Illustration House in New York, where they had a show of Saul Tepper's work at the time. And it had these blocky, squared-off strokes that were sculptural. And it reminded me of Duveneck. And I just started putting the two together, and I thought, okay, this guy I have to study. And he led me to Cornwell, which led me to Mead Schaefer, and led me back to Rockwell. And then, you know, Norman Rockwell went through a period that was similar to that, with some chunky strokes. It wasn't always the detailed approach, and I love that era of his work, so I was studying that. The trouble with the school was that it wasn't exactly the school, it was the time. It was all about conceptual art, so they were throwing out, they actually told me, painting and drawing is dead on the first day of school. And they said, we no longer do that. We're all about conceptual this and conceptual that. And I struggled through 4 years of art school trying to draw animals and people and scenes and learn perspective and all that stuff, when people were telling me that I didn't know what I was doing. Illustration did not die. That's what I heard when I first started in illustration, that it was going to die, and it had maybe 30 years left, maybe 20. Well, I blew by that a long time ago. It's still going strong, and it's because, I think, there are students coming up behind. It's just new generations want to express their thoughts and their visions, and they want to learn how to do that. And it's not going to go away anywhere. Even digital didn't kill that. Talking with my students the other day about the whole structure of teaching art and talent, and the way that people assume that if you either have talent or you don't, which I knew early on that I didn't, because I couldn't find it, and I tried really hard, and then, you know, cried into a pillow for 20 minutes and realized I don't have talent. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to fake this by learning all this stuff to get people to think that I have talent, because apparently talent's everything in this art business. Forget talent. It's not going to help you in the least. It never shows up when you want it anyway. It's about process, so learn the skills. That will give you everything else. That's the best right there. And then you got to give it 100% attention and go after it constantly. You've got to know where you're going and take the risk to do that and be willing to lose. The oil painting, I think it came out of a literature book I had in the 9th grade, which I thought was brilliant because it was really thick, because they had a lot of short stories and novellas and things in there and portions of famous books. I would study those paintings in that book all the time, and it basically had the history of art, and the impression I got was that if you're any kind of artist, you have to deal with oil paint, and you also have to draw like crazy and be really good at it, and then apply that to the oil paint. I'm sure it was just a young teenager's idea what he thought was the way it was done, but it stuck with me, and I wanted to conquer oil paint. The trouble was manyfold, which was, I went into a business that said goodbye to oil paint decades before I got there, and they kept telling me you can't oil paint in this business. And 2, I couldn't find anybody to teach oil painting because it was all conceptual now, and also oil painting takes a while to dry. So a lot of people told me that oil paint, you would never have an oil painting career in illustration because you won't be able to get it to dry. I had a lot of multiple little successes, and they all stack up. But the first time it really crested, I think, for me was when I did a painting of some guys in Africa on safari. It was the first time that I was building a scene to try to tell a story without actually writing the story down and telling it visually. Like a lot of the guys that I liked, the influences, like Rockwell and his generation of painters. So my agent said, we're going to do an ad for your work, and what are you going to do? And I told him the idea, and then I sent him some sketches. And I said I wanted to do a double-page spread, 2 ads. I don't want just 1 page, I want 2 ads, so that it crosses the gutter. So when you open that book, you only see Manchess. And he looked at the painting when I was finished, and he said, who are we going to sell this to, National Geographic? And I said, if we sold it to National Geographic, that would be a major coup. First phone call after the ad came out was National Geographic. And I started working with them for 20 years. I went on an expedition with them and all kinds of other stuff. And the first painting that came out was an illustration of the Battle of the Css Alabama during the Civil War. And it tested everything I had. Multiple figures, multiple stuff going on, explosions, perspective, the atmosphere, the light, all that. The more I accomplished in drawing and painting, the more I wanted to accomplish, and the more I wanted to be involved with doing pieces that communicated with people. I got a call out of the blue from the USPS to do the stamp for the Oregon Sesquicentennial. And I went to different places and shot reference and stuff. And then the perfect thing is the Oregon coast for that. Instead of a picture of Mount Hood, the Oregon coast was the thing. So I did a coastline for them, and that, while I was working on that job, I asked them, you know, do you have other stamps like astronauts or anything? And oh, you want to do more stamps? And so that is how you build camaraderie and future work, especially if you hit your deadlines and they like you and they like the work and you tell them I want more. Then that developed into a whole bunch of years of working for them. It's great. I was talking to my friend Irene Gallo on the phone, and she said, well, you're pretty good with snow. Why don't you do a polar bear? How about a guy riding a polar bear? And I thought, you can't do a guy riding a polar bear. And then I thought, maybe a guy with polar bears. And I sat down, I hung up the phone, I sat down, I did 2 thumbnails, and I knew exactly where I was going with that. So it was the guy on the mountain with the polar bear pack animals. And I thought, well, that ought to throw people off. And I had the best time painting that thing, and everybody started asking, what the heck is that for, and what's it about? And so that's when I realized maybe I should try to do a story that's mostly visual with a lot of prose, and see if I can get it sold. And I was thinking of Jim Gurney's Dinotopia series, which I loved and just brilliant. And I thought, well, I would love to do something like that for one of my own worlds, and I just stayed after it. I think that first painting was in 2009, and I wrote it for the next 5 years, designing and writing. So it was all in all about 7 years, and then that 8th year to paint it. Unfortunately, my father died when I was 22, so he never knew any of the things I accomplished. He used to love to read National Geographic cover to cover. He never knew that I actually had a cover on National Geographic magazine. To lose my dad at 22 was more of a blow than I expected, because at the time you're just dealing with this idea that there was so much I had to learn from him, and I wanted to ask him questions about stuff, and I didn't get to do that, so I was confused. I was already on track to try to impress him, so I just let that machine keep rolling. And I think it showed up again in Timberline, because Wesley is out to find his father, rescue his dad. I love these stories of survival, one guy against the elements or one person against the elements, and how they overcome that. I started out with, the character was about 38 years old in the beginning, but my editor had suggested to make it a young adult story, so I tracked back to a 17-year-old. And that's when the father thing came in, and I just followed that link, and I think I was digging stuff up from childhood and whatever else. And then once all that was out in the 0 draft, the one that you just pour everything into, then I had to go back and work on the first draft where I honed it, and that's when things changed away from, you know, being exactly like my dad. But there's a lot of stuff in there. He was a mechanic, and so I have mechanics in there. And he used to smoke cigars, and so I have some things in there where Wesley smells engine oil and cigar smoke. That's directly to my dad. It's funny, it all came together on Timberline. I really think Timberline's one of my masterpieces. I hope to have a whole bunch more of those. Not done yet. So it's kind of a sub-masterpiece, which will be maybe at the bottom of a whole bunch of other ones stacked on top. To go from that to the Norman Rockwell Museum is going from, you know, the moon to light speed in such a prestigious gallery. I can't even explain how deep that hits. It touches your core on something with that effect that will also push me into better paintings and more storytelling and larger paintings now, hopefully. That is something you can't get every day, and you work really hard to get that. Is that now there's no stopping that. There's no stopping that confidence. When I put the brush on the page or the canvas from now on, it's full of confidence. There's still room for failure, and I expect to do that, but now I've got the tools to get around that. That's what Rockwell means, you know.